today's November 10th FoodOn Curation meeting. Two things on the agenda. Troy with a few questions regarding GenEpiDB, and then we'll head into the nuts and seeds thing. And just one other piece is that next Wednesday, I'm going to go over the content of the OboFoundry Food Ontologies paper that I just did the second draft on in our weekly ontology review group, which is at 1 o'clock on Wednesday Pacific, if anybody else is interested in sitting in on that. So without further ado, Troy, would you like to pitch your questions?
Yep. Hi, good morning, everyone. So as you may recall from a prior meeting, I am working with a group who is trying to use ontologies to better structure data for a genetics and epidemiology database, so-called GeneEpiDB. And they've asked us for a number of new terms. These terms broadly fall into two categories. The first category is food items, for example, green leafy vegetables. And the second category is dietary items, diets that are high in water, as an example, or children who are primarily breastfed until the age of X. And they have, Damien and I met with them just to understand a little bit better what they need and why. And I think we were generally pleased that they're thinking about things in a clever and reasonable and realistic way. And they agreed to do some hard homework and first try and figure out for themselves what do they really need from FoodOn because it's not already there. And they did do some great work on that, and they came back with a list of terms. I'm going to just share my screen just for a second to give a sense of it. Here is, we definitely don't need to go through the details, but just so you've seen it, here's the table. Thumbs up, people can see it, yes? Great. So it starts out with a handful of foods, for example, malnutrition supplement or a fortified food product. Some of these things we actually have entries for, but they were just a little bit tough to find. Some of them we don't. And then here, later on, we start getting into things that are a little bit more diet related. Pardon my scanning, diet including dairy food product, diet including sweetened drink. Also a bunch of things that talk about not just in general what you plan to eat, your so-called diet or dietary pattern, but rather more recording of what happened to you, the age at which you first ate egg products, for example, or how long you were breastfed, things like this. And so this is the list of things that they've handed us. There's, I don't know, 100, 150 things in the list. What I would like to do is go through a couple, let's call them archetypal troublesome ones, and just get a little bit of feedback on how might we best handle these. And each of these things is going to need its own little micro analysis, and I'm working through that. But I would appreciate just a little bit of a little pattern recognition, a little bit of a general high level reaction to how to handle certain categories of things. So here we go. Let me start with the food things. There are a number of food items that they would love to include that I would consider to be food plus processing applied to that food. Boiled water, pureed vegetables, steeped beverages, things like this. So I just wanted to check. I think that our response to that is, check me on this, that we are gradually working through the food processing segment of our ontology, and we already probably could handle most of these, but we haven't formalized that process segment, and therefore don't have at our fingertips the exact terms. Is that right, or where are we at with it?
I'll chip in. So For things like boiled water, if we don't have it, we should have it. And in terms of linking that into processes, we already do have boiling as a process. So it's easy
Mhm,
for us to say water and potable water and output of some boiling process.
mhm, mhm. Great,
So quite happy to
great.
do that.
Cool. Specifically with boiled water, also with pureed foods, we do have, for example, boiled water as a thing. There's water in a bag, and there's boiled water, and there's tap water. These are listed as though they were separate kinds of water, so to speak. But I suspect in this case, because we're talking about nutrition and specifically infants and sanitation, they're going to want to know that the water has been appropriately sanitized, not just that it was hot when it went in you. And so I think in this case, they're not asking for boiled water, the liquid in a mug, but rather water which has been exposed to boiling temperatures for a sufficient amount of time. And therefore, the process plus food is a more appropriate thing than the boiled water drink we have. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So actually, what they're maybe really fishing for is sanitized water.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because you can have
Sterilized. Yeah.
sterilized water. Right.
And the same thing applies with pureed foods, right? Sufficiently prepared that a baby can eat them, as opposed to the things which are in an envelope in one part of the grocery aisle. Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of pureed foods, if we don't have a pureed baby food, we should. I thought we did already, but
Well, this is, I guess, my more general question. If they are looking for pureed foods, should we be finding or creating a food type, which is, I'm sorry, I may not be using the terms exactly right, a food type, which is that, or should we be handing them back food plus process equals puree? So that they, in other words, the mechanical equation that will give you, by definition, a food which is sufficiently soft, as opposed to a category of foods here that have
yeah,
an attribute.
right. So we're a little bit behind that question is a little bit of do we pre-compose something or just post-compose it? And
Yes.
for things like pureed food, it's such a common reference. I have no problems pre-composing it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll even say pre-composed pureed carrots, pureed peas, pureed potatoes, because
Mm-hmm.
they're just so commonly referenced. Now, in terms of the the um, the, the notion of pre-composing usually implies that there are actually two other or three other or many other existing entities that need to be put together in an axiom relationship formula to explain the category of this thing you're just creating.
Yes.
You're not pre-composing a term if it doesn't have any axioms. You're just minting a term. The pre-composing part is actually cross-referencing dimensions of this. So, but just to say, we can mint pureed carrots term without, quote, pre-composing the axioms that explain it. However, it's a nice to do what you just said, add the process of pureeing plus input food, baby food
Yes.
equal pureed baby food.
Okay.
So
All
that's
right.
that's an example of a micro model, and that's an example of us trying to standardize how this concept is represented in data. And
Okay. Great.
Yeah, this is Diane, because the old days, you just put it in, you mashed it up, you put it in a blender. You didn't have it in a jar or a little squeezy thing. So there might be some foods that are more appropriate to be pureed that you'd want to have available for people in a malnutrition state if you can't get them prepackaged.
Mm-hmm.
that
Great.
raises one other little point, squeeze in there, which is it's one thing to have like a store-bought pureed thing, and then it's maybe another thing to have a homemade pureed thing in terms of food safety and all of the lens of packaging and storage and all of that. When we would talk about a jar of pureed baby food, if we mention the container, maybe that introduces the food safety thing, the semantics of just a pureed carrots don't carry that extra stuff around sterilization and packaging until you introduce that.
Great. All right, and so I think what I'm hearing is, just to play back, is the best practice here. What we aspire to is for these kinds of common, slightly more complex but common things, to go ahead and mint a new term, but for it to be a composed term by also joining that to its other relevant ideas via axioms, right?
Yep.
Great. Speaking of axioms, if I've seen it right, we're missing lots and lots of these kinds of axioms. Let me just, that's not meant as a criticism, but more just to make sure I'm understanding the state of things. I'll give a couple examples. They've asked for vegetables or fruits with red, orange, or yellow flesh. We have the notion of red flesh, but we don't actually have any things connected to red flesh such that red flesh can be used as an axiom on things, correct?
Most of the time, no. There are a few little instances, sort of probe trials, where we've actually added that, but not much. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. And does that mean then that in an ideal world, now I'm jumping out of this particular engagement, but just thinking a little bit abstractly, in an ideal world, we would go through and make this massive net of axioms. We would think through colors and all the things with leaves and all the things that have been boiled and on and on and on, everything to everything via axioms. I mean, where that's appropriate, so that these so that we don't need pre-composed terms for anything in an ideal world.
Yes. So
maybe the last part is a step too far, that we don't want those terms, because there's a certain efficiency to having those things pre-composed.
Let me put it a different way. If a food is dried, if it says the word dried in it, then we should have, like, dried carrots. Then we should have that class be inferred or be directly attached to food dried, the general class. There's an axiom that's just waiting to be put in there. We've done that a little bit, but only manually. We need our programming hire, or possibly somebody else who has free time, will write a script to attach all of the foods that are dried to the food dried class right now. And it's very spotty right now. Just, we have not been systematic in that. That's necessary to do.
Okay, and then later also to take the dried food class and connect it to the process of drying, for example.
Yeah, well, that's the easy part. Like, I think we have a number of those food by quality classes are attached to their processes that generate them.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay. I know I'm taking a lot of time, so I'll wrap up in a couple minutes. The diet related terms. Oh, sorry. We have, they've asked for a number of things which sound a little bit like food claims. Foods rich in X, foods which are fortified, let's leave fortified aside, foods rich in X, for example, high in vitamin, high in potassium, what have you. However, I don't think they're asking for a claim. In other words, what someone uses as advertising language about their food. They're actually asking for something which is more objective, either a certain proportion of its nutrients are X, or the amount of X is above a recommended daily allowance, or something like this. We can follow up with them to find out what they mean by rich, but I don't think that the proper place for this is as a claim, but actually as something closer to a food composition table kind of thing. Would you agree?
Yes, there's a distinction between label and truth, ground truth or assertion.
Yes.
And we would want to have the ability to do both, and FoodOn does not have that ability right now. We just have the one class for, well, we have a labeling class that explicitly talks about labeling.
Yes.
And then beyond that, we don't have a mirror of that whole hierarchy.
Well, I guess maybe I would expect this to be in CDNO. In other words, the ontology which tells me how much vitamin K is also the ontology which enables me to break into a discrete variable is low or is high in vitamin K.
Yeah, that's a good liaison question. Where Magali?
Yes, you are speaking about, for example, iron-rich food product, or
Yes, that's a great
okay.
example. Yes.
And we already have some kind of discussion about what is rich and what is. You have to refer to a standard level to say that it is richer or poorer
Exactly.
than.
Exactly. In reality, everyone's going to have a slightly different definition here, a sort of working definition of what's sufficiently rich to be rich. And so I'll go back to them to try and understand what they really mean by this. But I'm guessing it's either it is some objective number, or rather, they could agree with an objective standard. I suspect that they're going to say, I don't know, however rich a nutritionist would say is rich enough to be rich, in which case it ends up being a sort of question to us, to CDNO type people, I think. Cool. All right. Last one is diet. The age you first ate barley is an example, but so is a diet including cereal grain food product here, for example. So in general, what we have with these diet ones are things that describe what and when and how food got eaten. Right? It is the interaction between food and consumer that is being described here. These are not different kinds of things going in your mouth. This is a description of how often you put it in your mouth, when you put it in your mouth, whether it went in your mouth or went in via an IV tube, all kinds of things, right? And therefore, I think, check me on this, that this, by definition, belongs in a separate ontology. This is the interaction between eating organs and foods, as opposed to describers of the foods themselves. And therefore, ONS, thank you, is the place for that. And then comes the question of who should manage it. But that thing is the better home, is the right home for these kinds of terms. What do you think?
That was the plan, yeah. ONS was handling both descriptive diet, which is the enumeration of things that a person eats,
yep.
but also dietary pattern. The not just a list of things that one preferentially eats, but also the frequency of that consumption and
what happened, historically. Yep. Good.
Or not. No, that's the distinction. One is whether it's at an individual or population level. One is the descriptive scientific survey response data set called a descriptive diet. And then the other is the dietary pattern, which may not actually be, it's not a log of what somebody ate. It's more of a summary of what they appear to eat.
I follow you.
Okay.
Great. And therefore, in the log, if that were built out and sufficiently detailed, we would expect to find things like the age at which you switched from breast milk to cow milk. That would belong in that universe of information. Yeah.
Right.
All right. What's the update on or current thinking on ONS and how that universe of data should get built out?
Right. So at the moment, I didn't hear back a response to my latest inquiry with Francesco Vitali, and he was in response to him going off to see if he could get more funding and help. And so I'm assuming that's stalled. I can make another effort, but it means that we can proceed with defining all these things as we see fit. But if we literally can't get new IDs issued, we will temporarily put them in as FoodOn terms. We import the ONS diet hierarchy, so we can mint terms and put them in the right place, and then just switch them over if it materializes that we can do so.
Okay, great. Okay, so then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend as though I am an ONS term minter, and then we'll wait to see whose ontology these things actually get birthed into, but with a sort of viewpoint of an ONS ontologist.
Yep.
Great. All right, that's all for me. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Troy. That's great. Okay, so I think I will share. Okay, so there's Rhiannon, there's a couple of entry points, it seems like, into this. And I was trying to find out the one that had Matthew's comments in it. It wasn't that one. Plant milk. So, Rhiannon, I don't know which entry point you want to talk to, whether we should start here with plant milk or the nut and seed product branch, if you're there. If you're not, I will do the background on this.
Hi, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties with my main computer, so I've had to switch to my laptop.
Okay. So I was
Yeah.
just saying, I'm not sure which entry point we want to start with, whether we want to start with the plant milk thread, or whether we want to do the nuts and seeds thread.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Do we want to wait to do plant milk for when like Matthew is here?
I don't think Matthew can make our regular sessions, so I'm happy to report out to him and make sure we cover his viewpoint in the through the thread stuff.
Yeah, so we can yeah, I'm happy. To me, I guess they're kind of two different problems. Are we talking about seeds and nuts, or are we talking about milk? Because yeah, talking about milk will address this, but yeah, the needs and nuts and seeds. Sorry, I'm a little flustered having my computer go crazy on me. It's just that, yeah, like looking at when kind of exploring the hierarchy of milk and looking at the different non-dairy milk products that we have, I was looking into how we're organizing some of our nuts and what do we mean by nuts, and finding we aren't very clear or necessarily consistent. And then that would be, so we need to reflect that in our regular nuts and seed stuff, as well as when we eventually do make our nut and seed milks, that hierarchy. So was looking a bit more into the botanical definitions and looking at how, okay, all true nuts are a seed, and so that they go under seed milk, and that we have a lot of things that are currently under nuts that aren't technically true nuts. So do we want to have that be a culinary definition? Magali posted a little hierarchy that shows, I believe, the Food X one a little further down, that shows that yeah, we have has a tree nuts category. So I guess it depends on, yeah, like it depends on, do we want to go with, or do we want our primary, I guess, nut branch to be a culinary description or to be a botanical description? Is kind of one of the biggest problems I think we have to.
Interesting. So a category like tree nuts doesn't break a botanically oriented hierarchy in that it's just sequestering a group of kinds of nut together. And you could sort of switch back to the botanical breakdown, if any, within that group. So that particular little line item isn't hard to imagine. I don't know if there would be contradictions in trying to mainly employ a botanical hierarchy, but then include some culinary categories in it in other ways.
Yeah, so I guess
sorry,
Oh,
but about this question about botanic versus culinary terms, we already have this kind of discussion about fruits and tomato, for example, or for
Right.
I don't remember, but I think the point is to distinguish between what is the botanical part. It's not the same
So FoodOn does have,
conception, you know. And so what you say, Damien, is that it is not difficult to match between culinary.
we can do a seeds hierarchy. I mean, a seed milk food product, and so that was Rhiannon's seed milk. Yeah, we can do a seed milk hierarchy and fit in this quote tree nuts subclass without breaking any botanical rules. It's like botanically vacuous, this tree nuts thing. There's no species called that, and there's no, maybe, I don't think there's a name for a botanical name for a tree nut, but it's a grouping.
Yes, it's a grouping because it is only the first level, and then there are some species of other nuts. Yes.
Exactly. So we can get away with sliding tree nuts in there, but I don't know if that's the same for the other ones. If cereal grains lumping together some botanically different things that are best in other categories or not, I don't know.
A grain is a seed. A cereal grain is a seed, but I think the proposal by Rhiannon was good to say that in the definition of seed we include seeds of groups and soybeans and so on, and true nuts. Is that possible to make a definition which will be inclusive?
Well, what was the latest? There was a plant milk definition. No, there was a general definition for milk. Okay, right. So seed milk.
It depends if it is two different things. I think to speak about seeds and to speak about seed milk, it's two different things. I think.
Yeah, I think we need to remove the milk from this conversation.
Yes.
Not think of it as related. More just use as an example. So if you were to truncate it off and just look at seed, nut, hemp and hazelnuts being what's considered, I guess, botanically a true nut because it has just a hard shell, and then the nut on the inside versus, say, an almond, or a cashew, which has a fleshy exterior, then a hard shell, and then the nut or seed, and thus aren't qualified as true nuts. But we can label them as nuts. But some people would be like, but a peanut's a legume. So it is a legume seed. And thus not a true nut. And so that's where you get into those, when I'm saying, I guess, a botanical hierarchy versus the label that tends to get applied to all of them as nuts in the culinary or purchase industry, I guess. Yeah.
So if we were to have a true nut category, then we'd have to have alongside it a not true nut category.
Yeah, that's the thing is, would we have like a culinary nut or a nut label category labeled as nut, or a common name as nut? Would be just like, yeah, how would we resolve that issue?
Well, it sounds like the distinction you just made isn't arbitrary. Like you pointed to a distinguishing feature of true nuts, that they have the hard outer shell.
Yeah.
So that means ontologically, there's no problem with that. That's actually a nice, clean distinction. So that's the botanical distinction, right?
Yeah.
But then the question is, how flat is this list for user APIs and so on, when somebody just wants to list all the nuts and doesn't care about whether they're hard or not, like almonds or peanuts or whatever, ground nuts. I don't mind a polyhierarchy to handle that kind of situation.
And then, so what would you propose as the other parent class in that situation? Would it be?
Well, everything's under seed food product. if there's a subclass called, and then there's nut food product. Isn't that the way it is right now in FoodOn?
When I was looking at it on my computer, I saw nut was not under seed. Maybe I was looking, maybe I didn't look at the relations in close, but I didn't see nut under seed. And I saw certain things under nut that weren't under seed. Or things that like almond was under, I believe almond was an example that was under nut when technically it's not a true nut.
All right. Nut food product is under botanical fruit food product at the moment.
Yeah, and I think I remember that we have connected on the lower level, like suppose almond whole is connected to the true fruit, but we haven't connected on the upper level, like a full branch, like almond food product is not connected to something, which says that it's true.
Okay, so the difference between a seed and a fruit seems to be an issue here. You've got plant seed food product. And then nuts are not underneath that. There's a plant seed or nut food product category, which is in FoodOn at the moment, which is just an O-ring of the two.
Yeah, which is one of those equivalence terms, which I guess is one of those things when I'm like, I'd be tempted to say if someone wants to say nuts that include seeds that aren't true nuts, that would potentially be something, but we're not obviously organizing it hierarchically underneath that because it's a like equivalence term, right? Or term, or class.
So the non-true nuts are still seeds, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Being in the ontology business, we can't sacrifice inheritance where inheritance is correct. So any biological properties that should be inhering downward must be preserved, even if it makes the hierarchies look a little unusual for the rest of the consuming world. But as long as we have specific classes that do meet the rest of the world's interests, such as tree nut or tree nut, yeah, then that's okay. It's just that they may not be able to sit under a particular position in the hierarchy. Okay, so back to this then. So it's just the challenge sounds like it's just that we have to familiarize people that nut milk is tucked under seed milk. Really, that's the only unusual thing about our purist.
And then moving like nut food products, or is it already under?
Well, nut food products are not under plant seed food product yet. We would be moving.
Okay, but we would be moving that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
To be by botanically correct in terms of inheritance.
Yeah. And then I'm just wondering, would we also need to modify the definition at all? Oh, interesting. I thought nut food product had a definition, but I don't see it when I'm looking it up right now.
Okay.
Where maybe I'm thinking of nut milk. Go ahead, sorry.
Nope, I'm just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay, yeah, there was an editor note, which then in our under nut, we have like a peanut as an example, which isn't a true nut. So I think, so it doesn't have a definition. So changing an editor note isn't that big of a deal, I would think, compared to that. But yeah, then giving it a definition that makes it very clear that we're talking about true nuts in this case would be important.
Right. Right, I see there was some effort to make tree nut underneath there already, but just one little almond kernel thingy is under there. Okay, so I'll confess I'm a little lost about whether there are any real issues. I'm if other people speak up, if you see problems, but I would say put nut food products under seed food products, and then if the category nut, the category nut should cover both these true nuts and then all the others. And maybe there isn't a name for the non-true nuts, in which case they're just sort of flat listed and next to the true nuts. They're siblings of the true nut class. Or we do something that is a little awkward, which is to find the not true nuts, if there really is a dichotomy between the two.
I mean, would it be weird to have a category called like culinary nut food products? Like to put culinary in a label like that?
No, I'm totally into that.
Because that to me would fit that class, and I think people could see that and know the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And the reason is it's more than arbitrary, and we do have some classes that are arbitrary, and that's fine to have them in an ontology. It's not that a human being can name all the differentiate in the class to pick out what it refers to in the world, and yet in our language we've already established as children grow what's in that class and what isn't. So it's fine to have classes like that, but the one that you just proposed, culinary nuts, isn't even that. It's actually it's got a definition that could pick out what it's referring to. Okay. Make it so.
Okay, I'll try to. Do you want me to try to capture what we've just discussed in that issue thread?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. I have a meeting after this, but after that meeting, I will do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess, oh, is Troy gone? I had something I tried to send before my computer crash, but I guess Troy is gone, isn't he?
Ah, right. He probably.
Yeah, it was okay. It was just about breast milk process. I noticed the definition said woman's milk, and I was thinking we either need to be clear: is this a human? Is this female? So using sex instead of gender. If we are not going to go non-binary, we could just go non-binary, or are we going mammalian milk and just poking a little bit more specificity into the definition. But
right.
I failed to send it in the chat when my computer crashed.
Right. I did see there were two definitions sitting side by side, one from Languel and one maybe from Uberon recently. I'm not in the last couple of days. I just glanced at it, and one mentioned milk from a mammillary gland, and then another one mentioned milk from a mammillary gland of a female. And I wasn't sure that you would need to mention female if we're talking.
Yeah, I don't think we do.
Isn't that enough?
No, I think that's projecting information that isn't relevant or necessarily true all the time. You can have men who have enough estrogen that they end up lactating, and that applies across species, right? So in the end, we're putting on a norm that doesn't necessarily apply to all cases. That doesn't need to be there.
Right. So yeah, make it minimal. Minimally true.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if with this being, do we want to spend the last like 17 minutes touching on the milk conversation? I know it's gone, there's like a whole bunch of mini threads in the milk conversation happening.
There is. Let's do that. Okay, so the thing I really want to get into the fray is that we did do a round of talking about this stuff a couple of years ago, and I'm just going to talk about the part that's analogs versus imitation versus substitute. And thread, so I'm not sure which thread actually mentions those things. It was a big long thread.
212.
Okay, 212.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I guess Do we have a non-mammalian milk right now, or?
Oh, right. I'd say that I think that's the other thread of conversation going on, is still trying to define what we would use. It seems like we're in agreement that a non-mammalian milk is needed. But whether, I know, I think Magali at some point used to suggest, well, maybe if we're applying analogs, we could apply it as a relationship instead of classes. And then someone, maybe as you did, so was talking about, well, we could have classes with relations to it. And then, so is that like substitution analog thread, and then that milk plant, or that non-dairy milk thread, because it's now going into a conversation of, well, what is dairy? So if you want to focus on the analog substitute conversation, I think we don't need to talk about the dairy element now.
Right. Well,
yeah.
What's most useful?
I think it is because, yes, you are right, Rhiannon, it is not the same level, but I think it is mixed, because there are also the issue 218 with many discussion from Matthew, and here we are talking about plant milk, but then in 218 I think we also have this conversation about milk substitute and analogs, but I think we have to agree first on the definition of milk, and then, because yes, I think because in English there is dairy versus milk, and so I think, Rhiannon, you have some suggestion about dairy versus milk in the late comment you posted.
And sorry, I threw that in like right before this meeting, so I might not have had time to read everything else everyone else is saying. But yeah, I guess what I was just, if we're talking about the milk thing, the dairy thing, I think I was just trying to say that I do think if we can have more specific versions of dairy, but I think we should have the most broad application in how it's used, and then make more specific ones. So that I was just, I wasn't sure if it was the direction that was being suggested, but I don't think we should have dairy be specifically about cows and then have a whole bunch of alternatives. Yeah,
it was not what I was meaning.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yes, because it was because Matthew said that dairy was only specific to cattle, and so to some species like cows, buffaloes, but we have other kind of milk also. So I think we have to define what dairy is. Dairy.
Yeah. And I guess like
because in the hierarchy proposed, there was a non-mammalian or non-dairy or non-mammalian. We have to choose something generic.
Yeah, I guess like in my mind, non-dairy, to me, like dairy product is a mammalian product, but we specify that it's coming from those like type of milk glands, whereas that way it doesn't avoid that weird mammalian culture, a bacterial culture or cell culture using mammalian like genes or something. If we wanted to go down the wormhole or the rabbit hole that Matthew suggested about cell cultures and avoid the use of mammalian, I thought non-dairy makes sense, because in like the definition, how dairy has been used in my experience, especially when I was working in the culinary industry, it was not specific to just like cows, bison, and like water buffalo. We apply it to goats. You apply it to just basically any mammal that produces milk or milk-like thing would be dairy, like under a dairy. So I guess I was kind of surprised when his version of dairy didn't include things like goats, sheep, and stuff like that. Or maybe that's not what he was saying. I guess I sometimes find it hard to follow his threads.
I think.
But so he seemed okay with dairy, I guess, by the end of that. Like,
yeah.
Yes, and he said because dairy means the context of milk production. But I do agree with that definition.
Yeah.
Do you also agree? I don't see the problem. I don't see where the problem is.
Yeah, I think as long as we add a comment in there to be clear that dairy isn't just to cows and cattle, and like as long as I guess we make that very clear in the annotations.
Yes, but I do agree that it can also include sheep and goats, as you mentioned. Yes, okay.
Yeah, and I think we just need to make it clear So anyone who sees dairy and is suddenly thinking too narrow, that, by the way, this is not that narrow term you're looking for, you would need to request a new term. And then the only other thing that I want to point out in that last little comment was the inclusion of liquid. Unless, like, with one of the parent classes, like, I know, Damon, you're talking about putting under, like, we could do some sort of food product category. I didn't mention beverage, but I guess I personally would steer away from beverage and steer away from liquid, because what if it's in a non-liquid form, like a powdered milk? And then suddenly we have to have another hierarchy for powdered milk that isn't related to, that has a relation to this, that couldn't be in it if we add liquid to that definition. So I think liquid is too specific, and that should be a subclass instead of the branching class.
But it do exist a difference between it. There is on the one side the liquid milk. Let's say milk is always liquid in its natural form, but then you can also have powdered milk. That's true. But I don't understand why you are speaking about beverage, because for me, beverage has a meaning of something transformed to be a beverage, not a liquid.
Yeah, so I definitely, like, I threw out beverage early, but I don't think it should be under beverage. I think it makes more sense under, as like Damien mentioned, under just like food product, as a food product class. And I think we should eliminate beverage or liquid from it. Because yeah,
you can mention fluid as Damien is just showing. We can speak about fluid.
Well, I guess I'm trying to argue that
okay. Damien, say it.
I'm going to chime in now. We'll, like many other organismal sources of food, we will want to hang on to the Uberon milk, which is defined as a liquid from a mammillary gland. So, but then the food products that are derived from this can be a separate branch. And there you can be, you can say the food product milk product branch derives from mammalian milk. Mammalian food product branch derives from mammalian milk, but that allows you to put in powdered or liquid.
Okay, yeah. So then we'd have that broad one that doesn't convey a specific state, that is derived from milk, and then underneath have liquid, powdered, whatever.
Right.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, Guy, can you hold on to that? Can you note that thought? I know there's 10 different things swinging around here in this.
Okay, I'll try to note that down right now.
Right. And I think so far we've kind of got that, because the part of organism branch has milk. I wish we could rename Uberon's milk to mammalian milk. We couldn't quite. So mammalian milk product is over on our side, on the food product side. And I'm allowing it directly under the mammalian milk product, this Uberon term. But then everything else in FoodOn is qualified by the word mammalian milk to make clear. But we're allowing that this can be all sorts of things produced, derived from, including powdered. But then we get into the cow milk branch, which isn't even, let's see, it's not even connected here. Maybe it's connected here. Yeah, now we get into the milk beverage question. There are many kinds of milk product, and this is meant to indicate the liquid version, whether it's packaged or not, from the different creatures. So
yes, but what about the mammalian milk with non-fat or pasteurized fresh? There is no beverage mentioned here.
There isn't, right? And
there are the liquid form.
Right. So these are all the generic terms. One could put the word in beverage, but it was sort of self-evident. So I guess earlier on, I just skipped it. But then there's this class, which is getting into the specifics, I suppose. It could just be mammalian milk, and then all of these guys could be under it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into the bovine.
Mm-hmm.
So
on the one side, it is milk by species, and on the other, it is milk by process.
right, exactly. And by calling this just a beverage class, then we are ruling out the presence of some other products, but then that gets a bit wishy-washy, I guess. Like we're allowing that these be top level curd, protein, whey, all of these products are our top level if we take the milk ones and pop them underneath this mammalian milk. Anybody else have thoughts about that? Are we getting in trouble somewhere somehow if the plan of action is to move these variations of milk underneath here? The other route is to actually name this, as you just said, Magdalene, mammalian milk by organism.
I like the idea. Sorry, I wasn't following properly because I was trying to take some notes on what our other discussion. I guess the only so moving milk cultured under mammalian milk beverage. I guess you could have milk cultured being applied in situations where it's not a beverage, I guess, is what if it's being used to make another cultured product? Would then that imply a beverage relation that we don't want if we use it to say, oh, this is used in cultured or butter or buttermilk or kefir? Kefir would be a drink in most cases, but I guess I'm just wondering, is it a relationship that culture needs to have?
Yeah, right. I was thinking, so there's this cultured versus uncultured distinction. And if we have mammalian milk cultured, we should have mammalian milk uncultured. Which is normally what we think about. I think that's what this was meant to be, an uncultured thing. But let's see if there's a definition. Okay. Well, FoodOn term. And why is this different? Okay, milk product, right. So this is this. Okay, so this is the beveragey part. And yet we already have milk. And it's all raw here. So people have the mammalian milk. This is the mammalian milk subclass of the liquid. And then we've got this beveragey thing over here, which is really kind of a duplicate if we're restricting this to be just milk. So question is this category larger and encompassing this category? And I think it is.
I think so too, especially if we're going with that it's derived from milk, because that milk is technically the milk food product. That's just that uber-on definition of milk, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the raw resource, and mammalian milk beverage can include it. This should be underneath that. And then this beverage thing means that all of these things are derived from that. So I don't know. I've been a little, the derives from or is relationship here is a little awkward. If I was to move milk underneath here, and the superclass is saying it
I guess
derives from milk, but it also.
Can I propose that, like, what if we just didn't have that milk under mammalian milk product? Like, we just leave it under bodily fluid, and we have the mammalian milk product is or is derived from relationship to that, and then the Uberon milk just isn't part of the food product hierarchy at all.
Okay, yeah, that helps, because that's also happening over on the plant side with all sorts of plant anatomy pieces. Okay, let's do that. And then we just have to maybe bulwark this mammalian milk beverage with maybe a comment. Tighten up this equivalency to say and derives from some milk. By the way, though, if the parent class mammalian milk product also said animal derived beverage and derives from some mammalian milk product, that would throw a red flag, because we've got two classes with exactly the same equivalence. And Obo Foundry does not like that, and I understand why, because you've accidentally said two classes that are the same, even though you're. So I run a report that checks to find such things. Okay. Right. Oh, it's 10:01. So I'd like to. So we do have an action plan there, which is at least to take the milk class and move it back. Move it outside of here, back to.
Yes.
So that's good. And then we'll have a derives from relation between mammalian milk product and that. Then the last thing is, what class can we fit plant milk and animal milk and cellular milk under? And that's why I raised this notion of organoleptic qualities. Initially, some of these products were trying to be developed to emulate each other. And then some of them decided they didn't want to be considered an emulation of or an imitation of. And that's why we've got this, we introduced the analog relationship to say two products have an analog of some kind, soy milk, oat milk, and milk. You might use them in the same application for porridge or coffee or whatever. So what kind of a relationship would we name that? And we don't want to say imitation or substitute one or the other. Depending on your reasons, there may not be a choice of substitution. So that's why analog was fashioned. But if there's a better name for that, such as a similar, has food product similarity, or has food product parallel, then I'm all ears. But as Matthew said, there are products that are actually developed to imitate. And he was talking about vanilla, imitation vanilla. So I get that there maybe should be another relation as food. It is imitation of stronger relation to say that it's asymmetrical. You're not saying natural vanilla is an imitation of artificial vanilla. So that just meant to me that we'd want to have for milk, maybe a class called milk that is not dedicated to plants or animals or cellular agriculture, but can cover all of them. And to do that, where would you fit that? So food product by quality is actually kind of a category where you're naming off some organoleptic, some sensory aspect or other quality of the food. So that invites that milk milk could be that general sense of organoleptic milk, or some other better word, would fit under here, and that's where we could put these milks here, all of these. That's my latest thought. I'll try to formulate that a little bit better. At the moment, I was casting about for right, we need to rename the milk or milk-based food product to mammalian milk, and then have a cross-organism milk food product. I guess I don't think we need to go this far. We can still stick with the quality thing.
Yes, because I don't think it is a good point to compare, to say that soy milk has the same organoleptic quality than milk, than goat milk.
It's not, no, but it's similar, right? It's similar rather than starkly, strangely different.
But I don't grasp the nuance between similar or analog. It is.
I know it's kind of yeah. It's so when you go to the grocery store, there's a reason that they've lumped cow milk and soya milk products.
Yes, but it is a personal choice. It is not a matter of nutritional or
right. So we don't have to populate the subclasses of these distinctions, except there is this call to be able to go to a class called milk style food product.
Milk style, yes.
Milk style, right. Maybe that's the key, to use the word style. And then have all of these guys listed underneath that. Okay, well,
because for me it is the same consumption. It is the way you are consuming this as a kind of milk, but it is neither organoleptic or nutritional the same.
Definitely, yeah, totally agree.
Yes.
Nutritionally different profile.
It is just the consumer choice and the kind of moment or way you are eating or consuming it, which is similar, but not the product itself.
Yeah, I roughly agree. It's not identical, but it's much closer than juices are to milk, or coconut milk I substitute when I go camping because it's kind of like milk. So it's
the same usage.
Yeah, same kind of role, same kind of organoleptic effect. Not identical, but similar. So that's the motivation. Okay, well, I'll try to cook up maybe another name or two to see. All right, thanks, folks, for attention and help. Goodness, I think we made some progress here, which is great. All right, I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
See you.
Right, thank